Alrighty, folks, we are live. I'm George, a founder of Solo. I'm here with my friend Greg. Greg, can you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Greg Anjewierden. I am an attorney in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I have a company called Debtbrief that helps find resources for people that are sued by debt collectors.
Fantastic. Thanks for coming on the show today. All right, folks, this is Solo. We're going to be talking about how to resolve your debt lawsuits, among other things. Today, Greg is an expert in the space, helps a lot of people go through this process and resolve all kinds of issues, especially debt. We're especially talking about if you have been sued by a collection agency. Greg, who's an attorney, is going to be giving you tips on how to win. All right, before we dive in, just a quick disclaimer: we are not your lawyer. Solo is not a law firm. We aren't offering you legal advice or creating an attorney-client relationship. We're just doing a webinar. And we reserve some of the time for questions that people have. So if you have any questions live, just put them into the chat, and our man Yale will be responding to those questions. And also we will be taking some of those questions on the show live as well. All right, we also have a few people who have given us questions ahead of time that we will be responding to. And Greg, let's go ahead and jump into the first person. We have JD in Washington. Here's what he says. I defaulted on a credit union credit card. Principal amount is $23,000. Last payment was 18 months ago. The debt was discharged and picked up by a debt collection agency. That agency has tacked on another $14,000 in interest payments. I've made half a dozen offers to the credit agency to enter into a payment plan, and they are demanding a lump sum payment in full as the only option. They have now filed a lawsuit against me up here. I owe a response to the court next week. What options do I have? Should I respond and deny the debt is mine, or should I admit it and tell the judge I have tried numerous times to settle, but the collection agency refuses to negotiate? I cannot afford to pay this amount in full.
Okay, so you definitely need to file an answer, right? If you don't file an answer, you got a default judgment against you, and really like nothing else matters at that point. Now they've got a judgment for the full amount, which I guess would be like, what, $37,000, and you don't want that. So you definitely need to file an answer. So I would use SoloSuit, generate your answer, and when you file an answer, you don't have to just admit or deny. You can say, I don't have enough information yet to admit or deny, right? And that's one of the three options that you've got when you're responding to a lawsuit. And I think you can legitimately say that at this point, especially if it is a collection agency that's suing you, right? So you don't know if that debt was properly transferred or sold to that collection agency. So I think at this point, I would file an answer, say, don't have enough information to admit or deny, then continue to try and negotiate with them, right? Now, you cannot, what I see people do a lot is in their answer, they'll say, well, yeah, I owe this debt, but I'm trying to negotiate it, and they won't do what I want. Well, then they'll turn around and they'll file a motion for a summary judgment or judgment on the pleadings, however it works in your state, and you're going to lose the case right then and there if that's what you tell the judge. The other side does not have to settle with you. Settlement is an optional thing that each side can decide if they want to do or not. Oftentimes, it's hard to settle a case early, and so I think you've got to defend yourself until you can get that settlement done. Sometimes it just takes defending the case before they realize that, hey, maybe we don't have all the information we need to prove that they owe this debt. Or maybe it takes them going through this case to realize, they've still got to get that $37,000 from you somehow, whether that's garnishing wages or whatever. And they'll realize as they fight the case, as they try to collect from you, that you don't have it. And then they might be more willing to settle later. I see tons of cases that can't settle early, but do settle later, but you've got to engage in the process in order to settle. So what I would do in situations like this, I'd use SoloSuit. I'd file my answer. I'd probably use solo settle to then try and negotiate a settlement. And if that doesn't happen, I continue to defend the lawsuit and hope that I can settle later on down the line. Because you can settle even after they get a judgment against you. But that's kind of the approach that I would take in a situation like that. Like what gets them there? I mean, the thing that I see a lot is, uh, it happened a lot in COVID. During COVID, people got behind on their, maybe they got laid off or lost their job or whatever. And I think when you end up with $23,000 in credit card debt, most people that I talk to that have that much credit card debt probably had employment issues, whether unemployment or underemployment, and they just used the credit card to try and bridge the gap till they could get full employment, is usually how you end up with that much.
Right, right. So we were saying, what do people do to get into this much debt? You're saying, especially during COVID, he may have lost his employment, and then he was using his credit card to get by, essentially.
Yeah, and obviously we saw it a lot more with COVID when a lot of people got laid off. But if you just got laid off, sometime in the last year, like a lot of people will use a credit card to just try and get by until they can get employed. And then what a lot of people can try and do is like, okay, now I am employed, but I have all this credit card debt. Can I reach a settlement to get that taken care of? Because I do have some money now, but I don't have $23,000, right? So debt settlement, I think, is a good option if you can make some payments toward that and try and negotiate a settlement.
Okay, great. I actually see JD is live with us in the comments. Hello, JD. He's saying, yeah, I bought. I was laid off for 6 months, and I bought groceries and paid bills with my credit card.
Yeah, I'm not at all surprised by it. Most, I think a lot of people might come out and say like, oh, people that just rack up credit card debt, they're just out there, buying, toys or whatever. Most people that have that kind of credit card debt that I see, I'm not surprised to hear he was laid off, and like that sucks. I'm sorry to hear that. But yeah, it really is people just trying to get by, buying groceries and things until they can get back on their feet.
Right. And just, surmising here, JD, feel free to weigh in, right? You probably were in a pretty good financial position to be able to get a limit of $23,000. As not everybody can get a limit that high on a credit card, is that right?
Yeah.
Right, for sure. What are some other options here, Greg, that would like come to mind as far as avoiding this kind of debt? Like, if somebody's in this position again and they're using their credit card to get by, are there like other options besides doing that if they've been laid off?
Besides a credit card, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's a tough position. I think, if you can find ways to get money that is, lower interest rates, then a credit card is always helpful. Now, this is obviously not going to be available for a lot of people. But for example, if you own a home, you could try and get a HELOC loan. Those are going to be lower interest rates, and the payoff is going to be a lot farther. Like that's going to be a better option because the HELOC's not going to turn around and sue you, 18 months later because you've got a much longer period. That's obviously not an option if you don't own a home that has some equity in it, but that's another option if you have that.
For sure. We got another message here from JD saying it's frustrating because I reached a settlement with a lot of my other banks, but the credit union won't negotiate. I make good money, but I don't have 30K in cash right now. Right? Yeah, JD, I feel you. Most people don't, right? Like, who does have 30K in cash right now to make a debt payment?
So here's one other suggestion in a situation like this. I don't know, he's probably, my guess is he's negotiated with the collection agency so far, and now they've sued him. What I've found is that once you get sued, sometimes it can be easier to negotiate a settlement because now you don't have this collection agency who you're talking to, just some person working in a call center. Now you've got an attorney on the other side that has to go to court, that has to do work on this case. that is kind of thinking through the legal arguments and things, as well as the practicalities of getting that money. And my experience is that in most cases, you can usually get a better deal when you negotiate with an attorney as opposed to like a call center agent. So now that he's being sued, like I'd reach out to the attorney who filed the lawsuit, whose name is on the complaint, and talk to that person. Or, you know, another really good option obviously would be to have SoloSuit do that for you.
For sure. Yeah, you can use SoloSuit to connect with the law firm and get a settlement, right? That's like the best way in our mind. So you can just go onto our site, to use the SoloSuit settle a debt lawsuit option, and then just answer a few questions, and we will get you the best settlement you can get there. Some other thoughts that I'm privy to are that credit unions are usually a little bit more difficult to settle with than a regular bank. For whatever reason, credit unions are usually a bit less willing to settle. I think it's partly because they are usually formed as a nonprofit and they make money in a little bit of a different way than a bank does, but they're usually going to be a bit less willing to settle. Great. All right, folks. We got a question here from Matthew in Mississippi, I believe. His state abbreviation is MI. I can never keep all the MI or the M abbreviations straight. Maybe that could be Michigan or maybe Minnesota. Not super sure. How do I get disclosure of what Midland, the debt buyer, paid for my delinquent account? I heard it's pennies on the dollar. So can I get a disclosure for how much they paid for my debt?
Okay, so the first thing I would say is it almost doesn't matter to you, right? All they really need to show is that they paid something for it, right? So they're going to buy the debt and they've got to show that they've properly purchased this debt. So you can, and let's assume that you haven't been sued yet. You can send a debt validation or debt verification letter. And they might send something back. They may not, probably won't send the amount back that they bought it for. But then once you do get sued, you could send a discovery request and ask for that information. So for example, if your court allows it, you could send an interrogatory, which is just a written question that they have to answer under oath. And you can say, did you purchase this debt from the original creditor and how much did you pay for it? And then they would be required to respond to that question within, usually it's about 30 days, depending on the state. So you could get it that way. Now, it probably doesn't matter because as long as they can show they bought it, you're going to be on the hook for the full amount, regardless of what they paid for it. So it's not really a good argument to say, oh, it's a $10,000 debt, but they only paid $100 for it. That argument is probably not going to work in court. But that's how I would get that number, would be to send an interrogatory.
Right, great. Yeah, I think people sometimes have this misconception that because the collector maybe bought the debt for 4% of face value, means they're going to settle for 5%. That's just not the case. They have strict standards. Usually when you're negotiating, you're going to be negotiating. So like if Midland bought the debt, you're probably going to be negotiating with the law firm lawyer. And the lawyer probably has a legal agreement with Midland that says they can't settle like below X%. And if they do settle below X%, probably like 60 or 80%, then they're likely going to take that out of their commission. Right? Like they probably are getting paid on a contingency fee, and if they settle below a certain amount, it's probably going to be the lawyer giving up their own fee on that debt. So it's probably just not going to happen. That said, sometimes it does. Sometimes it does. Like on SoloSuit, we've seen debts forgiven. So we've seen debts settle for 0% based on like extreme hardship. We've also seen debts settle for above the full amount just because the consumer really wants to get paid or they were mistaken about what the full amount even was.
I think it depends on the facts of the case too, right? Like if they've got all their ducks in a row and they can show that this was your debt and they can show that Midland properly purchased it, they've got a really strong case. They're not going to, they're less likely to accept a lot less. Whereas if maybe their documents aren't as good, it's not as strong a case, the lawyer then may be willing to take a hit on it just to get something because that lawyer knows, I may not win this one in court. So I think it really is dependent on the facts of the case as well.
For sure, for sure. We got a question from Sandy in Georgia. I lost my job back in 2020 and I cannot pay any of my debt. I owe about $70,000 in student loans, $35,000 in personal loans. I owe the state of Georgia $9,000 and about $15,000 for credit cards. So it sounds like that's more than $100,000. That's a significant amount. I'm on a payment plan with the IRS now to pay another $2,000. I attempted Chapter 13 for 1 year until I ran out of money. So it sounds like she defaulted on the payment plan on the Chapter 13, unfortunately. I'm working side gigs, but the income is only enough for living expenses. I am receiving lawsuits now. I've been to court for 3 of them. 2 of them are now judgments, and the other one was dismissed because the creditor did not show up in court. I informed the creditor and judge that I do not have a job to pay for anything and is now in judgment status. I have received another warning letter from a creditor last week to dispute owing the debt before getting served by the sheriff. I cannot file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy because of my house. I was informed that if I file, I will be forced to sell my home and only keep about $15,000 of it. If I sell the house myself, I'll get to pocket about $100K in equity. The problem is, either way, I will end up homeless. My credit card rating is poor, and I will not be able to rent an apartment or buy another home because of the cost of living. In the meantime, I'm still trying to find employment. If I get a job, it'll be a fighting frenzy for the creditors on who will be paid, and I'll be working for free practically. What other choices do I have?
That's a tough one, honestly. And I don't know if there's really good answers here. Like this isn't going to be an easy one. I mean, you can always, I think one thing to remember is you can always settle debts at any time, even if there's a judgment, right? So maybe your financial situation changes later. Well, they've got a judgment against you now, but they're obviously going to have a hard time collecting on those judgments right now. So maybe in the future, there's more opportunities to settle. That's not going to solve the problem now. I think the other thing is, there are people that are kind of what we might call like judgment proof, where they get a judgment and it's just almost like, I've got so much debt, like who cares? Like you're not going to see that debt. And, the judgments can expire after a certain number of years. And so it's like if you're feeling like, well, maybe these credit cards, they're so far down the line on priority. If you've got IRS debt and you've got student loan debt, that it's almost like they're probably not going to see any money from you, would be my guess. So it's almost like, who cares if they have a judgment against you? Right now, one of the other things is there's going to be limits on what they can take out of your paycheck if you do get a job, and that might just have to be factored into your budget until things can get back above water. But if bankruptcy is not really an option, you've just got some tough choices to make as far as employment, and just realizing that maybe 25% of my paycheck I'm just not going to have. So I don't know if you, George, have any other suggestions, but that's a tough situation.
Sandy, we feel for you. If you're on the video live today, feel free to weigh in and let us know a little bit more about the situation. There are options. We're rooting for you. We want you to be able to get out of this bondage that is debt in your situation. We really feel for you here. So a few things. So one, you went through Chapter 13, right? Sometimes people don't really recommend Chapter 13 because there's a payment plan, right? Essentially, Chapter 13 bankruptcy like isn't really what people think when they think of bankruptcy. They usually are imagining a Chapter 7 bankruptcy where all of the debts get discharged and they go down to zero and you're debt free. With Chapter 13, as you found out, you usually get onto a payment plan for a long period of time. And around 70% is the number that I'm familiar with. Around 70% of the time, people default on those payment plans. They fall off track, and then like all of the debt becomes due, and then they just kind of paid a few $1,000s for bankruptcy without getting anywhere. Chapter 7 is ideal if you can do it, but in this case, you don't want to give up your house, right? You're saying basically all of your equity in your home would go to pay off the debts. It doesn't sound like you're working. You're working side gigs. You say that you're working side gigs right now. You only have income enough for living expenses. Based on you earning side gigs, maybe you're making like $20,000 to $30,000 a year. That puts you at a debt to income ratio if you're like making payments on any of these debts, or if you were making payments on the debts. That puts you at a debt to income ratio that's very high. It's definitely above the 36% that banks look for and consider healthy. It's probably going, right, you're at a debt to income ratio of like 400 or 500% probably. So that's a bad spot to be in, and definitely, in my mind, a pretty good indicator that you should be looking into bankruptcy more. You're saying you cannot file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. I don't know if cannot is quite the right word there. It sounds like you don't want to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, right? Because you would lose your house. But it sounds like you have significant money in your equity of your home, and maybe you should explore that further. And you can sell the house. That'd be used to pay off all of these debts, and then you could rebuild from there, right? You potentially still have a few $1,000s left. You're saying maybe you'd have like $15,000 left after you sold and paid off all these debts, and that's not a terrible spot. Right? That's not that bad of a spot. You could get the $15K, you could get back to like regular working job, and then you can move forward, and you'll probably even buy a house again in like a couple years potentially, depending on what kind of job you get.
And if you're working. Yeah, if you're working, you'll be able to presumably pay rent. I know there was like a concern about being homeless, but you get all these debts wiped out. You don't own the home anymore, but you're working, you pay rent, you got a place to live. These debts are off your shoulders, which I think is going to be a huge mental load.
Right.
Often, I agree with you. I think that might not be a bad option.
Yep. And so something that we do with SoloSuit currently is we are plugging into people's finances. So we're able to really help people understand the complete picture of their entire financial profile, and then figure out the best way to communicate that to a collector. And in your situation, debt settlement really might be a great option as well, right? If you doesn't seem like you've necessarily gone down the debt settlement path very seriously yet. You've been dealing with these lawsuits, responding to them, showing up in court. That's great. You're in a great position before considering bankruptcy to also consider debt settlement. And if you're able to show very legitimately, like how you could with SoloSuit, to the collector that you are making very little money, as a credit card or the personal loan people are basically last, like the credit card and the personal loan people are last in line, right? So you have to pay the IRS first, then you have to pay the state of Georgia, then you have to pay the student loans, and then after that, you can pay the personal loans and the credit cards. They're like essentially last in line in bankruptcy. You could probably get pretty good deals on settlement. So you should definitely explore settling with SoloSuit. And even the student loan, even those aren't dischargeables, same with like the IRS and probably the state of Georgia, you still might be able to get better deals on those. Even if it's a very long payment plan, right? I think an inspiring story that I think back on from time to time is actually from a professor of mine who was a big-time partner at a big-time law firm, and told him I was working on Solo when I was in law school, and he told me, he hadn't told anybody this story before, he didn't mention it much, But he said when he was newly married, which was probably like 50 years ago, he got a medical debt that it was unexpected related to something with his wife. And they called him trying to collect on the debt, basically went into collections. He said, hey, I'm a law student at this point in time. I can't pay this entire amount right now. And then he negotiated and he got onto a $50 a month payment plan. And the debt was so large that he then paid $50 a month for like decades towards this debt and finally paid it off. I think not very long before he retired.
Even after he had the money, he's like still like,
Yeah.
there's a no interest deal. I can just pay the $50 every month.
Yeah, and he just paid $50 a month for a very long time. And finally got it all paid. Well, I think at some point, like he could have negotiated like a lump sum payoff at some point in time, but to him he just wanted to pay the debt, so he just paid the full amount, kept on going. And
I love that story.
right. Yes, that's a bit of a story there for you. All right, let's see if we have time for one more question. We usually wrap up about half past the hour. We got a question from a live listener here, Monkey. I'm being sued by Bank of America. They already summoned me, and I already answered. What do I do now? So Bank of America already summoned me, and I already answered. What do I do now? Monkey, this one's a pretty straightforward one. You can just use SoloSuit.com. All right, go to SoloSuit.com and click the reply to a lawsuit button. It'll take about 15 minutes. We'll ask you a bunch of questions. It'll give us answers. We'll use that in our software to create your response, and then you can just get that. We will file it for you in the court and get you well on your way to getting that thing settled. If you recognize the debt, if you agree you owe it to some degree, you should then make an offer on SoloSettle to get the debt fully settled and connect with the collector.
Yeah, what I would add to that is, if the question is, what do I do after the answer? And it's just, you're going to try and negotiate settlement with SoloSettle. But there are other things you can do in the lawsuit. Number one, you can just wait. They have the burden. They've got to get the case to trial. Or, what I like to recommend to people is, send some written discovery requests to the other side to verify that they have the information to prove that you owe the debt and that they, I guess it's Bank of America, so it sounds like it's probably the creditor that is suing themselves. So, send them some written discovery requests and find out, ask for all the documents that they have. And, you can ask them any questions about how much is owed and how the interest was calculated. And you can get a lot of information from them that way that then you could use to maybe argue that they don't have enough information to prove that they owe the debt. Or you can then use that as leverage in a settlement negotiation as well.
Fantastic. Let's see, folks. I'd like to show you some things that we've been working on here at SoloSuit, just to wrap up. Let me see if I can pull something up. Greg, do you have like another minute or two?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Great. Let me run another question here. Let's see. So we have one. Thank you all for writing in with questions. Appreciate every one of them. We got one from Dean in California. I'm being sued for $3,900 by Synchronized Bank, I think it means Synchrony Bank, through Settle and Hammer on May 29th. But I have lost part-time work and live only on SSI. This is causing me extreme financial hardship. I live on a tight fixed budget. I have a car payment and a mortgage. After food and medicine, there's not much left. Is there anything that I can do?
I mean, I think it's the same kind of things that we've told some of these other people, right? Like, you're being sued. Okay, go to SoloSuit and prepare your answer and file your answer. Don't admit right away that you owe the debt in that answer. And then I think you want to use SoloSettle and try and settle that debt. Now, I think that, you don't have a lot of money, but like that story you just told, where your professor got on like a $50 a month payment plan forever, like just see what can be done. You let them know that you're on Social Security. That's not going to be something that they're likely to be able to get out of you. And, you might be able to convince them that, hey, I really don't have a lot of collectible assets. So, this payment plan is going to be a better deal for you, because otherwise you're going to get a judgment against me and you're going to get likely nothing. So I think there actually is some good opportunity to settle. The other thing is, when I hear you say it's a $3,900 debt and it's Synchrony Bank, you probably have a basis to file a motion to compel arbitration as well. And that's an amount that motion to compel arbitration might work. Or maybe you file that motion to compel arbitration and you use the threat of arbitration as leverage in your settlement talks.
Yeah. Great. All right, folks, just in closing, I want to show you all something that we haven't really released or talked about in the public much yet. I'm going to try to switch my camera around a little bit. Hopefully that works out. Here we go. Let's see if this will work out. Give me just 1 second. Alrighty, there we go. We are looking at our website now. So folks, looks like y'all can see our dashboard. So this is just a demo account here in Solo. So we're adding a lot of value for consumers here in the consumer dashboard. You can come on, check this out. You can actually even see your credit report here now. So if you just come in and then check out the credit report, you'll be able to see, what's going on with your credit. You'll be able to see if there's things that you need to take care of. We're going to be adding in lots of value here. We're going to be adding in the credit score. We're going to be adding in your personal finances, so you'll be able to see and track all of your finances here. And soon you'll also even be able to get personalized tips from our AI engine that will be helping you with this entire process. So that is fun. If you haven't yet, you can come in, you can connect and get your credit report here. You're also able to generate many legal documents, a plethora of legal documents now. If you come over here, we have all kinds of legal documents. You can just get those started. You can take a look here and see all kinds of documents that we can do. So if you want to do a request for a response to request for admissions, a response to interrogatories, you can do that. If you want to do like a power of attorney with somebody for whatever reason, you can do that. If you want to write your living trust, you can generate that. So all kinds of documents and needs that you want to solve, you can use Solo to do that. So I just wanted all of you here on the show tonight to be the first people to know about that. So you can go onto the website and check that out. Alrighty, so just wrapping up here. Let's switch back to Greg. Greg, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, happy to be here. Hopefully this was helpful to the people watching.
For sure. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so my website is debtbrief.com. Again, you can find a lot of resources there to help you deal with your debt collection lawsuit, as well as you can sign up to meet with me for consultation. And then, you can find me on social media, especially on YouTube, Debtbrief.
Fantastic, folks. Yep. And so, in summary, if you've been sued for a debt, you can use Solo. You can use this to respond to the lawsuit. And then, we recommend for most people the best outcome is usually going to be settlement. So you can go on Solo Settle, make an offer to settle, and we are working hard to, work with collectors as well as consumers to really make a settlement a very smooth and easy process for everyone involved. All right, thanks so much for coming on. We're in your corner, and thanks a lot for showing up. Take care.